When my in-laws pressured me to give up my career, I had to make a choice. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. Quit your job, or we're done helping you. And I mean done. Diane said it in the middle of her marble kitchen, voice casual but edged like a knife. The pendant lights hummed above us, catching on the crystal glasses and her perfect French manicure. Mark sat on a bar stool between us, staring at the countertop like if he avoided eye contact long enough, this conversation wouldn't be real. I'm Roger, 31, a software engineer at a mid-sized startup in our city. I build tools that help small clinics manage patient data safely. Nothing glamorous, nothing that'll end up on a billboard, but work that actually matters to me. I fought hard for this career, late-night coding boot camps, loans in my own name, a childhood of counting every dollar. My job isn't just a job. It's my independence, my escape hatch, my proof that I am more than anyone's charity project. Diane, that's not what we talked about, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You said you wanted to discuss boundaries, not issue ultimatums. She smiled, slow and practiced. Boundaries, Roger, are exactly what I'm talking about. This obsession with your career is ruining your marriage. You're never home. You're exhausted. You're keeping my son from the life he deserves. Mark flinched at that, and my stomach twisted. Their help wasn't theoretical. They'd given us a below-market rent on the small duplex they owned, covered Mark's car lease when his hours got cut, and floated us a few thousand during a medical scare last year. Our savings account was a fragile thing. My health insurance was through my job. Our stability was a house of cards with Diane's manicured hands holding the bottom ones. If I quit, it wouldn't just be pride I was sacrificing. It would mean losing the one safety net that was actually mine, my shot at a promotion I'd been grinding toward for 2 years, and maybe even the leverage to leave if this marriage stopped feeling like a partnership and started feeling like a contract I hadn't really signed. If you keep working like this, Victor added quietly from the dining table, don't expect us to keep stepping in when things go wrong. I didn't know then that something much bigger than my career was at stake. To understand how we got to Diane's marble ultimatum, you have to understand the first time I met her. It was 3 years earlier, at a Christmas party in this same house, when I was still just Mark's boyfriend from the tech world, and not yet the son-in-law she could legally manipulate. She'd taken my hand, looked at my thrift store blazer, and said, "So, you fix printers or something?" It was a joke, technically, but it landed like a measurement. I laughed and explained what I did, back-end systems, data security, infrastructure that kept clinics running. Her smile never reached her eyes. "Ah," she said. "So you stare at a computer all day? At least Mark works with real people." Back then, Mark was a physical therapist. Diane bragged about him nonstop. His healing hands, his gift with children, his stable, respectable career. Every time she praised him, there was a shadow around the word respectable, like the opposite of whatever I was. Victor was quieter, a looming presence in tailored suits. When he spoke to me, it was mostly about the market, interest rates, the smart way to build wealth. I knew he owned several properties around the city, that he'd made good money in construction and rentals. I also knew, from the way Mark's shoulders tensed when Victor talked budgets, that money was how Victor controlled everything. One night, after a particularly pointed dinner where Diane had asked, in front of everyone, "So when are you going to get a real senior position, Roger?" Mark and I argued all the way home in his car. "You could have said something," I snapped, staring out the window at the dark streets. "I didn't think she was being that serious," he muttered. "She just doesn't really get what you do." "She doesn't want to get it," I said. "She wants to make sure I know I don't measure up." A few weeks before the kitchen ultimatum, she'd joked again at Sunday lunch. "I told the girls at church you do internet stuff," she said, spearing a piece of salmon. "It's easier than explaining whatever cloud thing you're obsessed with." Everyone laughed, except Mark, who swallowed hard and stared at his plate. I didn't realize that her contempt was the foundation for something much more dangerous. The pressure started small, like a dripping faucet you tell yourself you'll fix later. At first it was phrased as concern. Little comments slipped between bites of roast chicken at Sunday dinners. "You look exhausted, Roger," Diane would say. "Are they overworking you? Maybe you should think about stepping back a little, focus on the home front." "The home front," I'd echo, trying to laugh it off. She'd tilt her head. "You know, being present as a husband." Mark works hard. It might be nice if you matched his hours instead of competing. Mark would stare at his phone, thumbs hovering over the screen, not quite defending me, not quite agreeing. That in-between silence felt worse than an outright attack. Then came the offers. One evening, Diane called while I was debugging a stubborn issue from our kitchen table, half-eaten takeout beside my laptop. "Roger, darling," she said. "Victor and I have been talking. You two struggle so much with your schedule. If you wanted to take a little break from work, just for a year or two, we could cover your rent, give you space to breathe." My brain snapped straight to the numbers. Our thin emergency fund, my student loan payments, the fact that most of our security was tied to my health insurance. "I appreciate it," I said slowly, "but I actually like my job. We're managing." "You say that now," she replied, voice softening in a way that made my skin crawl. "But what about when you want children? What kind of father is never home?" We didn't even have a timeline for kids yet. The way she said father felt less like a hope and more like a requirement stamped in invisible ink across my forehead. That night, Mark admitted his parents had floated the take a break idea to him first. He repeated their phrases almost word for word. "Time to breathe. Focus on what really matters. We can help if Roger won't budge," like he'd already rehearsed the script in his head before bringing it to me. I asked him whose future we were actually planning for, and he didn't answer. That was the first time I realized they were coordinating against me. The first time Diane humiliated me in public, it was at Victor's 60th birthday dinner. They'd rented out the back room of an Italian restaurant downtown, all exposed brick and dim Edison bulbs. Victor's business friends, their wives, Mark's extended family, everyone was there, dressed just a notch fancier than I was. I had come straight from work, still wearing my company hoodie over a button-down, badge lanyard shoved into my pocket. We were behind on a release, and I'd stayed late fixing a bug that could have exposed patient data. I was wired on cold coffee and adrenaline. Diane clinked her glass. "I just want to thank everyone for coming," she began, smiling wide. "Victor has worked so hard to build what we have. Our business, our homes, our family. We're so proud of our children, too. Mark, with his dedication to caring for people," and her eyes landed on me. "And Roger, who does, what is it again, dear? The internet?" A couple of people laughed. My ears burned. "I build systems for healthcare clinics," I said, forcing a smile. "Security, scheduling, that kind of thing." Diane waved a hand. Yes, of course. Computers. Anyway, the important thing is that our family is grounded in real work and traditional values. Not everyone understands that these days." Later, in the car, the words spilled out of me like poison. "You didn't say anything," I told Mark, gripping the steering wheel tight as we sat outside our duplex, engine idling. "You just let her mock me in front of everyone." "She was just making conversation," he said weakly. "You're being sensitive. She didn't mean anything by it." "She literally said my work wasn't real, Mark. In a room full of your family." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, if you hate being around them so much, maybe this job isn't worth the drama." I stared at him, stunned. "So the problem isn't your mother, it's my career?" He didn't answer, just got out of the car and slammed the door a little too hard, leaving me alone with the dashboard light and my racing thoughts. That was the night I first let myself wonder if he secretly agreed with them. After that birthday, the air in our apartment thickened. Arguments didn't explode. They accumulated in layers, quiet and suffocating. Mark started sentences with "my parents just worry" more often. I started staying later at the office just to avoid walking into another conversation about my hours, my meetings, my priorities. One Tuesday in March, I came home after an emergency deployment and found Mark sitting at the kitchen table with a spreadsheet open on his laptop. Diane's name glowed at the top of an email thread. "What's that?" I asked, dropping my bag. He clicked the screen closed too fast. "Nothing. Just budget stuff. My parents offered to help us organize finances." The next weekend, he brought up the idea of me going part-time. "Just for 6 months," he said, drumming his fingers on the couch. "Mom thinks it could take the pressure off. You're burning out, Rog." "So your solution to me being tired," I said slowly, "is to give up the one thing that's actually mine?" He frowned. "You always make it about control. Maybe they just want what's best." At work, Priya noticed the dark circles under my eyes and the way I flinched when my phone buzzed. We'd started together at the company and shared a tiny desk pod littered with coffee mugs and sticky notes. "You okay?" she asked one afternoon when I'd stared at the same line of code for 10 minutes. "You look like you haven't slept since the Obama administration." I laughed weakly. "In-law drama. They think my job is ruining my marriage." She snorted. "Yeah, I've met those types. They want you dependent, not happy." Outside of work, friends began to drift. I turned down invitations because I was too tired or too embarrassed to explain why I couldn't host, couldn't travel, couldn't commit to anything beyond surviving the week. Meanwhile, Diane filled Mark's phone with long messages about family unity and not letting outsiders dictate your life, and I could feel which outsider she meant. That was when I realized my so-called support system was quietly splitting into teams. The first real crack in Diane's polished facade came on a rainy Thursday night. I'd swung by their house to pick up a slow cooker she insisted we borrow, since you're too busy to cook properly, and ended up standing in their foyer listening to her whisper fiercely into the phone. "I said we'll have it covered," she hissed. "Just give us another 90 days. The last tenants left it a mess. We're still sorting it out." I pretended to fumble with my shoelaces until she noticed me. She hung up fast, smile snapping back into place. "Roger, you're early. The crockpot's in the kitchen. Mark not with you?" "Late shift," I said. "Everything okay?" "Perfect," she replied, too brightly. "Just vendor nonsense. You know how people are." Except I didn't know how people were, and I also knew Victor never let vendors push him around. On the drive home, her words replayed in my head. Another 90 days, last tenants, mess. Their rental properties were supposed to be their crown jewel, always full, always profitable. Why did that sound like a landlord begging for time? A week later, a piece of mail showed up in our box addressed to Victor, but with our duplex address. It was from a bank we didn't use. Mark tossed it into a drawer. "Shouldn't we give that to your dad?" I asked. "He probably updated the wrong address once," Mark said. "He'll get it eventually. Don't make it a thing." At work, my curiosity mixed with dread. I'd seen what late notices looked like when I was a kid, the way my mom hid them in the bread box. Diane's frantic whisper sounded a lot like those days. All afternoon, numbers floated over my monitor. Interest rates, grace periods, eviction timelines, blurring into the error logs I was supposed to be fixing. I kept imagining Victor's empire balanced on the same flimsy margins my family had lived on when I was 12. Later that night, when Mark fell asleep on the couch, I pulled the drawer open, fingertips hovering over the envelope without quite touching it, like it might burn me if I confirmed what I already suspected. That was the first time I wondered if they were actually drowning. Once you start looking for cracks, you see them everywhere. A few days after the envelope incident, I forgot my lunch at home and swung by our duplex at noon. Mark was supposedly at work. Diane was out with friends. Victor, according to Mark, was overseeing a renovation project across town. As I walked up the front path, I heard voices inside. Through the thin living room window, Victor's voice came through, low and tense. "They're already 30 days past due," he said. "If the bank calls you again, you say nothing. I'll handle it." Diane answered, muffled. "I told you, we can lean on Mark if we have to. Roger's job is just a phase. He'll give it up if Mark pushes." My hand froze on the doorknob. They were talking about us like chess pieces, assets to redeploy. I made noise with my keys before opening the door. By the time I stepped inside, the living room was empty, only the faint smell of Diane's perfume lingering in the air. A second later, she emerged from the kitchen, all smiles. "Roger, what a surprise," she chirped. "Home for lunch. How sweet." Victor appeared behind her, adjusting his cufflinks. "Busy day?" he asked casually. "Always," I said, forcing my face into something neutral. The interaction lasted less than 2 minutes, but it replayed in my mind for hours. Every time Diane called me family, I could now hear the subtext: property, investment, collateral. For the first time, I wondered whether our below-market rent and helpful budgeting advice were generosity or pressure tactics with a payment plan attached. At work, I told Priya what I'd heard, leaving out our names but not the gist. She swiveled her chair to face me completely. "Okay," she said. "Whatever this is, you need to protect yourself. Separate accounts, copies of important documents, everything. People do wild things when money's involved." That night, while Mark showered, I took pictures of our lease, our insurance cards, my employment contract, anything that proved what was actually tied to me. I didn't know yet that the trail of clues would lead straight through my marriage. The mini-earthquake hit 2 weeks later, disguised as a simple scheduling conflict. Diane texted our group chat, me, Mark, and her, asking if we could come by on Saturday morning to talk about some big family news. The phrase pinged something anxious under my ribs. I've got a deployment window Saturday, I replied. We're pushing a major update. I can come by late afternoon. She responded instantly. This is more important than your little computer thing, Roger. Rearrange it. Mark jumped in. Mom, he can't just rearrange a production push. There was a long pause, then 3 dots, then nothing. A minute later, Mark's phone rang. He walked into the bedroom to take it, but the walls in our duplex weren't thick. You're choosing his job over your parents? Diane snapped through the tinny speaker. You know what we're dealing with, and you're worried about some code? What you're dealing with, Mark said quietly. You haven't exactly told me. Silence. Then, softer, we're under some pressure with the properties, okay? The bank's breathing down our necks. We need to make some decisions, and I thought our family would want to be part of that conversation. By the time he came back to the living room, his face was pale. What did she say? I asked. He sank onto the couch. They are behind on a couple of mortgages. The rental income hasn't covered everything. Dad made some aggressive investments. They might have to sell the lake house. She wants us to move into one of their places and consolidate expenses. Consolidate expenses sounded an awful lot like, we'll control your housing completely. Over the next few days, Mark floated the idea like it was reasonable. It's just for a while, he said. We'd save so much. You could step back at work, maybe even take that break Mom keeps mentioning. The pieces clicked together painfully. Their mounting debt, their obsession with my hours, the push to have us under their roof. For the first time, I saw they needed my paycheck more than me. Once I understood that my job was a line item in their crisis plan, something in me hardened. Up until then, I'd been trying to negotiate, to compromise, to smooth things over. Now it felt like I'd been playing checkers while they played chess with our lives. I booked a therapy appointment through my employee assistance program, a quiet Tuesday slot during lunch. Sitting on a gray couch across from a woman named Dr. Hall, I laid it all out. The contempt, the offers, the sudden transparency about their debt. It sounds like they're trying to pull you into their financial system, she said. And your job represents independence from that system. No wonder they're threatened. So what do? I asked. If I refuse, we risk losing our housing, their help, maybe even Mark. What do you want your life to look like in 5 years? She asked back. In that version, are you working? The answer came out before I could overthink it. Yes, absolutely. Then any plan has to protect that, she said. You can set boundaries, but you need contingencies. Savings, legal information, support outside this family. I left her office with a headache and a to-do list. That night, while Mark watched TV, I opened a new savings account in my name only and set up an automatic transfer. I pulled my credit report. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer who specialized in family and property law, using a personal email and telling Mark it was a work meeting. The lawyer's assistant asked simple questions that felt like accusations. Whose name is on the lease, on the car, on any shared debts? I realized how many of our blessings were technically owned by Victor and Diane, how carefully they'd kept us entangled without ever calling it that. At the same time, guilt gnawed at me. Mark wasn't just one of them. He was the person who held my hand during panic attacks, who celebrated my first big bonus with cheap champagne and takeout on the floor. Every step I took to protect myself felt like taking a step away from him. What I didn't know was how soon I'd be forced to pick a side. The ultimatum dinner felt like walking into an ambush I'd already seen on the calendar. Diane insisted we come over on a Sunday evening, just the 4 of us, after my supposed busy season at work. I brought a bottle of mid-range wine like a peace offering. Mark brought the hope that this would all blow over. The table was set more formally than usual, cloth napkins and the good china. Diane had made roast beef and potatoes, Victor's favorite. The entire time we ate, I could feel something coiled in the room, waiting. Finally, when plates were still half full, Diane dabbed her mouth and folded her hands. We've been talking, she began, glancing at Victor. And we think it's time we all face reality. Reality, I echoed, my fork pausing midair. Victor cleared his throat. We're restructuring. selling the lake house, refinancing a couple of properties. It's been a rough few years. We're going to move you two into the Maple Street house. No more rent. We'll handle the utilities while we get everything sorted. Mark blinked. That's generous, he said. Diane smiled, but there was steel under it. In return, we think it would be wise for Roger to step back from work. Just for now. Focus on the marriage, help with things at home. Once we're stable again, you can think about hobbies. Hobbies, I repeated, something hot rising in my chest. It's not a demotion, she added quickly. It's an opportunity. You're killing yourself for a job that doesn't love you back. Mark looked at me, eyes pleading. We'd save so much money, Rog. We could start trying for kids sooner. This could solve everything. Solve everything for whom? I tried to picture myself in their Maple Street house, under their roof, with no paycheck, no insurance, no exit plan. In my mind, every door in that house had a lock on the outside. Diane leaned forward. We're not asking, sweetheart. This is what responsible families do for each other. My hands shook under the table as every possible response jammed in my throat. In that moment, I knew any answer would change everything forever. I didn't give them an answer that night. I mumbled something about needing time to think, about not wanting to make a huge decision over dessert. Diane pressed, of course. What's there to think about? But Victor finally raised a hand and said, let the boy sleep on it. The word boy stung more than he realized. In the car home, Mark was buzzing with nervous optimism. Can you believe it? He said. No rent. A bigger house. We could finally get ahead. By me quitting my job, I said. By moving into their property and letting them bankroll our lives. He sighed. It's temporary. They're in trouble, Rog. This is how families help each other. Funny, I said, how their version of helping always involves me giving something up. We went to bed without resolving anything. Mark fell asleep quickly. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the fridge and the louder hum of panic in my chest. The next morning, while Mark showered, I opened my laptop and typed out a list titled, If I Say No. It included things like, find alternate housing, price one-bedroom rentals, check if my company offers relocation assistance, ask Priya about short-term roommates. Underneath, I added, separate emergency fund, update beneficiaries, know my rights if kicked out. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer in a small office above a coffee shop. She was brisk but kind, and when I explained the situation, she didn't look surprised. They can choose not to renew your lease, she said. But they can't just throw you out overnight. And they can't force you to quit your job. What they do have is leverage, emotional, financial, and social. Your best defense is documentation and options. By the time I left, my backpack was heavier with photocopies and my phone heavier with notes. I understood now that Diane's help had never been free. There had always been fine print. I'd just been too grateful and tired to read it. For the first time, I wondered if saying no meant saying goodbye. The confrontation didn't happen in a therapist's office like I imagined. It happened in Diane's living room, under a painting of a sailboat she'd never actually sailed on. She called another family meeting the following Sunday. This time, I didn't go in empty-handed. I had printed copies of an article about local foreclosures that mentioned one of Victor's LLCs, highlighted in yellow. I had notes from my visit with the lawyer. I had my own budget spreadsheet showing exactly what would happen if I quit. Lost income, lost insurance, our reliance on their charity. We sat opposite each other on stiff couches, Mark beside me, Victor beside Diane. She opened with no pretense. So, she said, have you made your decision? Yes, I said, my heart pounding. I'm not quitting my job, and we're not moving into Maple Street. Mark inhaled sharply. Diane's smile disappeared. You're making a mistake, she said flatly. You're choosing a temporary job over permanent family. I slid the printed article onto the coffee table. No, I said. I'm choosing not to tie my livelihood to a sinking ship. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, furious. You've been snooping. I listened, I said. When you yelled about 90 days and tenants. When Victor talked about 30 days past due. When you discussed my job like a variable in your rescue plan. Victor's jaw clenched. We have it under control, he said. We just need to tighten things for a while. Then you can tighten without my paycheck, I replied. Because if I give up my work, I have no safety net if this all goes south. And given the foreclosure listings, it is going south. Mark looked between us, shell-shocked. Is that true? he asked his parents. Diane stood abruptly, eyes shining with angry tears. How dare you bring outsiders into this, she snapped. Lawyers, therapists, whatever nonsense has convinced you you're a victim here. For a second, Mark's hand tightened around mine like he was anchoring himself. In that moment, I saw him choose which family to betray. Mark didn't say anything dramatic. He just cleared his throat and, in a small but steady voice, said, Roger's right. We can't base our entire life on your finances. If you need to sell properties, sell them. But we're not moving in, and he's not quitting. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting. Diane's face hardened into something I'd never seen before, all the warmth stripped away. Then you're choosing him over us, she said. Don't come crying when the consequences hit. Victor looked tired, older than I'd ever seen him. We'll be reviewing all our arrangements, he said, including your lease. On the drive home, Mark gripped the wheel like it was the only solid thing in his life. I'm sorry, he kept repeating. I didn't know how bad it was. I should have believed you sooner. I believed that he meant it, but belief didn't change the numbers. Within a month, we received formal notice that our lease wouldn't be renewed at the end of the term. The polite letter didn't mention that we were family. It just said the owners intended to pursue alternate options for the property. We scrambled. I pulled every overtime shift I could without collapsing. Mark picked up extra hours and side gigs. We toured crappy apartments with peeling paint and ones we could barely afford. Eventually, we landed in a small, slightly dingy one-bedroom across town. No yard, no dishwasher, but the lease was in our names only. The first night there, surrounded by boxes and the faint smell of old carpet, I cried, not from sadness exactly, but from the sheer exhaustion of holding my ground. At work, my performance dipped for a while. Late-night packing and early morning commutes aren't kind to clean code. My manager pulled me aside gently, asking if I needed time off. I thought about explaining everything, about turning my life into a cautionary tale in the break room, but the words lodged in my throat. Admitting how much power my in-laws still had over my mental state made me feel small in a new, humiliating way. That was when I realized holding on to my career might cost me everything but myself. Healing wasn't a movie montage. It was a series of awkward Tuesdays where Mark and I sat on opposite ends of a therapist's couch and tried to untangle the knot of our marriage. Some sessions were quiet. Others were raw enough that I left with a migraine. I don't know how to be a good son and a good husband at the same time, Mark said once, voice breaking. My parents paid for my degree. They bailed me out when I messed up. Saying no to them feels like betrayal. And asking Roger to give up his job? The therapist asked gently. What does that feel like? He swallowed. Like using him as a shield. We started drawing hard lines. No more financial entanglements with Victor and Diane. No loans, no temporary help. No letting them pay for big purchases. We blocked their access to our online banking by changing passwords. We agreed that any major family conversation would happen with both of us present or not at all. Diane did not take the new boundaries well. She sent long texts about disrespect and outside influences poisoning our family. Victor's messages were shorter but sharper. You're making a mistake walking away from what we can offer. For months, holidays were tense or non-existent. We spent Thanksgiving with Priya's family, awkward at first, but warm by dessert. At Christmas, Mark and I cooked in our tiny kitchen and FaceTimed my mom, who cried happy tears just seeing us safe and together. At work, I slowly found my footing again. I got assigned to lead a small project and, later, received a quiet promotion and a raise that had nothing to do with Diane's approval. For the first time, my stability came from a system she couldn't yank away. We opened a small future fund account and labeled the goals simply options for a house someday, adoption fees, or a solo exit if things went sideways again. Watching the numbers grow, even slowly, felt like breathing cleaner air after years of secondhand smoke. We were finally building a life that they couldn't repossess. Looking back now, from the quiet of our slightly crooked one-bedroom with its thrifted furniture and mismatched mugs, the whole ordeal feels both enormous and strangely simple. Diane wanted control. Victor wanted stability without sacrifice. Mark wanted peace. And I wanted something I couldn't name back then. The right to be an adult whose life wasn't a group project. People like to say family comes first, but what they usually mean is the loudest people in the family come first. Saying no to my in-laws didn't feel noble. It felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping the ground would appear under my feet. Here's what I've learned. Love without respect is just dependence dressed up in nicer clothes. A marriage where one set of parents gets veto power over your career isn't a partnership. It's a franchise. And any help that requires you to shrink yourself smaller and smaller isn't help. It's a down payment on your obedience. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. We still see Victor and Diane sometimes, but it's careful, limited. They still make comments about wasted potential and family obligations. And sometimes those words still find the softest parts of me. The difference now is that they can't threaten my housing, my paycheck, or my ability to walk away. On good days, I leave work just as the sun is sinking behind the hospital across the street from our office, my badge swinging, a reusable grocery bag cutting into my hand. I walk up 3 flights of stairs to our apartment, unlock a door that no one else owns, and find Mark stirring pasta sauce in a pot we paid for ourselves. If you're listening to this and someone is asking you to give up your future to make them more comfortable, remember this. No amount of approval is worth living a life that doesn't feel like yours when you're alone in the dark with your thoughts. Start with one small act of defiance. Keep the job, apply for the program, open the account in your own name, and watch how quickly your world starts to feel bigger again. The people who truly love you will want you standing on your own 2 feet.